The internal game dev discourse on social media continues as we're now talking once again about originality and uniqueness when it comes to games. Some people saying that just keep creating unique games. We need more unique and original titles out there. But it is a lot harder than it sounds. And for the critical thought, we're going to talk about why uniqueness in of itself doesn't sell a game, and some of the biggest misconceptions surrounding reinventing the wheel. As anyone can tell you, making a successful game is incredibly easy. There's just so many quick steps to it. But in actuality, getting a game to become popular is very, very difficult. And there is this tendency from a lot of people to simplify success. Some will say, well, a game just did everything perfectly. Or this game is 100% unique and original, no one has ever seen anything like it. But the truth is that the most successful games, the ones that do become popular in the mainstream, are those that really have to square the circle between something that is unique and hasn't been seen before, but it's still relatable and that someone can approach and understand what the game is. And this is one of those topics I'm definitely one of the best people to talk about as someone who has played many, many, many indie games, especially a lot from up-and-coming and first-time developers, where they don't have a full background in terms of game dev and understanding UI UX, so they will oftentimes make some of the more off-the-wall and crazier ideas for their games. And we've even seen like more established developers who maybe get into indie dev for the first time, thinking, now is the time. I can make that original game that, everyone has said that will never work, and I'm going to be the first one to make it work like that. But the problem, or I should say the problems with this, is that originality in of itself does not sell a game. And this is a very easy trap for developers to fall into, that I will create something that is so unique, something that no one has ever seen before, and it will just manifest consumers. The problem with that is that the consumer base for video games is very diverse, but at the same time, people tend to follow certain niches or niches or cliques when it comes to the games they like. If you think every consumer out there is like me who will play and try every single game that comes their way, that ain't happening. And most people, once they find a genre or two that they like, that's it. They like shooters, they're going to play shooters. If they like racing, stealth, and so on and so forth. And convincing that audience to say, well, you enjoy a stealth game, would you like to play my high-octane rhythm battle sim bullet heaven? It's not going to happen. And for developers, it's very hard to understand just what will the impact of your game is going to be. Because just throwing everything against the wall like that doesn't equal a great game. And I have another topic that I'm going to be doing a video about regarding evergreen genres that kind of relates to this. The challenge is that for every genre, every mechanic and system out there are some elements you can break, some elements you can bend, and some that you cannot touch at all. Because if you're changing certain fundamental aspects of a game's design, you don't have that genre anymore. Let's say someone's trying to pitch to me a 3D platformer, and they describe it as, okay, so it's a game where you're driving this car really, really fast, and you're able to hit springs and bounce around. Well, that sounds like a racer. No, it's a platform since you're jumping up around while you're driving and making sharp turns and trying to pick up boosts. Still sounds like a racing game to me. And you have to understand when you're adding or putting in unique elements into a genre, they can't clash with the inherent nature of that genre. If you're trying to build a survival horror game, but you're throwing in super challenging ultra kill level shootouts, that's not survival horror anymore. It's action horror. And if you market your game as action horror, that's a different story. But if you're trying to build a original premise around genre combinations or unique elements, they have to fit. And that takes me to a very important point. I have a riddle for everyone watching this. If genre A has a consumer base of 1 million fans, and genre B has a consumer base of 2 million fans, if I create a game that combines genre A and genre B, how many potential fans do I have? And if you said 3 million, you are so wrong, it's not even funny. You see, a easy trap that designers fall into is this idea again of creating the ultimate genre. I'm going to make a first-person shooter, platforming, rhythm, space sim, 4X visual novel, walking sim, bullet heaven, battle royale. And it will be the most perfect game of all time, right? Somewhere a developer just had a heart attack as I said those words. But you see, the trap when we talk about uniqueness is that taking elements from genre A and genre B and combining them does not create a game that appeals to both genres. This goes back to one of my earlier design papers I wrote about action and abstracted gameplay. That the extremes of these genres exist in completely different worlds. And a huge marketing and design trend of the 2010s was trying to merge them both. This is where we got to the idea of Borderlands, a role-playing shooting, having more action-driven RPGs, or more RPGs with action elements. Because as we all know, the fan of a game like Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest is the exact same audience as the people who play Call of Duty and Battlefield. Again, it doesn't work like that. And it's why when you're trying to be very original with your games, that if you're just throwing genre combinations and genre cues together and hoping that it's going to create this perfect game, it will never work that way. Because you're creating a game that's going to specifically appeal to someone who, I like a little bit of genre A, I like a little bit of genre B, let me see a game that works like those two together. And to be fair, sometimes it does work. And that goes to another major point about selling uniqueness. Why do certain games blow up? And when we say blow up, we're talking Balatro, Vampire Survivors, Darkest Dungeon levels of blowing up. Some of you may argue, well, they were good games. But you see, just being a good game is not enough in the market today. There are lots of good games. We've played lots of really good games. They are not selling like Balatro, Vampire Survivors, and so on. And while some of it goes back to earlier points that we've said about being the first game to do something unique and original, it's also about kind of tapping into something that people want to play. And that is something that is incredibly hard to gauge and understand after the fact. Again, people will try and theory craft and argue and analyze the likes of Vampire Survivors. They'll try to make their own Vampire Survivors. I'm sure we haven't seen any other bullet heavens in the past, 3 years now, right? But trying to understand why a certain game or a certain genre has tapped into the popular zeitgeist is exceptionally difficult. Some of it is really about sometimes just dumb luck. You stumble upon that perfect combination, that perfect equation that no one thought people were really into, and guess what? They were. A good example of this is a game from the developer of Haku. I think it was Rusty's Retirement, something like that. I'll put a description to it or a link to it in the comments down below. But the game was designed as an idle game that plays along the bottom of your screen the whole time. Now, as someone who's played lots and lots of idle games, I thought, yeah, that sounded nifty, it sounded cool, but it didn't really fit with me because having that distraction on the bottom of my screen would destroy my work ethic even more so. But guess what? It has blown up for the developer. I think it sold many more copies than Haku, and now we're seeing this kind of soft reinvention of idle games, all being built to fill on the bottom of the screen, top of the screen, side of the screen, stuff like that. And the developer themselves is surprised that the game has blown up that well for it. And that is really great news. And again, sometimes you have these games that you never really thought that would be popular. And it turns out a lot of people wanted something like that. It's that old adage that, the consumer doesn't know really what they want when you're trying to sell something to them. But there is another aspect of this when it comes to uniqueness. And it goes back to that first thing that I said about what elements you can bend, what elements you can break. At the end of the day, there has to be something that the consumer can attach to or that they can approach. And again, this is why 100% uniqueness or 100% original games don't work. If you're building a game that no one's ever seen before, no one has any reference to, they have no idea what this game is, a lot of people aren't going to play that game. And convincing or trying to convince them to play it is going to be like pulling teeth. It's why a lot of people who cover games, or a lot of influencers and streamers who will cover or they build a brand around one genre, that's a genre they're going to play. And you try to get them to play something that they're not familiar with or they're not accustomed to, it's kind of like throwing marketing money out the window. If someone only covers cooking sim games, and you reach out to them for collaboration for a hardcore first-person shooter, yeah, there may be some memes, there may be some fun to be had, but they're not going to be able to best represent that game, and they may just completely hate on it for however long that game is going to be played. When we talk about games like Balatro and Vampire Survivors, again, while these games did do something differently, they still had very familiar aspects. Balatro had elements of deck building and gambling/poker. Vampire Survivors was essentially like an auto battler or just like a very basic action game. And I know that is distilling or reducing these games down quite a bit, but these are the elements that people will attach to. These are things that they will say, well, I like a deck builder, but maybe I didn't like this aspect of it. Another quintessential example of this would be the kind of, explosion or what we've seen carve out of the logistics sims, your Factorios, and Factorio being a good example. Factorio is a game that did something entirely original. It did it at such a level that no one else has managed to ever scale or reach. So the number 2 example of that is a game like Dyson Sphere Program. And Dyson Sphere Program, again, had those DNA elements of Factorio, but they did things entirely different. And then another big example would be something like Shapes.io, which was a very redux example of a logistics automation style game. And it succeeded because of that. When we look at games that do things unique and original, there still has to be, again, some aspect of something that people know, that they understand. Factorio looks from the top down like an RTS game, like a game where you're putting stuff down, structures and all that. But it plays, again, very much differently once you get past that. Stardew Valley is a game that, well, it looks, plays, and feels like all the farming sims and slice of life sims, and again, Harvest Moon. But once you dig deeper, there is more to it than that. And it's also why, and for any developer watching this is a very excruciatingly important point to understand. If you're building something that is very unique and original, you better do a really damn good job of presenting and onboarding your game to people. Because it does not matter how original, unique, and mind-blowing your game is at the 10-hour mark if everyone stops playing 10 seconds in. And as another point to build on top of that, if you wait 10 hours to actually show people the good stuff in your game, that's also a very big problem. And it's why, again, as another trap when we talk about unique and originality, that the games that do this right, they spend a ton of time in terms of onboarding and the presentation of their game. They want to make sure that you understand just what the heck this game is about. If you, as a developer, don't understand what makes your game special, the consumer is not going to find that for you. And again, when we talk about this idea of just saying, well, my game is 100% original, it's not. There is always some common DNA or strand with other games. It has to be, because you had to have been inspired by something with creating your game. And if you can explain that to people, if you can build that into the onboarding, okay, so maybe you've never played my game, but you maybe have played a game like Cook Serve Delicious, or Star Control, or XCOM, or anything like that. That's a basis to start from. And it's also where you can start telling someone, what is the difference? Because again, you have to be able to not only sell the originality of your game, no matter how small or large it may be, but you have to explain it as well. And if you can't do that within minutes of loading your game up, then one of two things are going to happen. The person's going to get bored with your game and say, well, it's just like all these other examples that I've played and who cares? Or, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm completely confused, uninstall and refund, and they're never going to come back. So to wrap things up for our critical thought today, originality is an important selling point. It is a very big point if you're going to market your game, how you build your trailers, your store page, and etc. But just having originality and nothing else is not going to be enough. There has to be something that the consumer can attach themselves to. And the more you kind of bend and break mechanics like this, you have to understand who is going to be the market for this. Because maybe, just maybe, there is someone out there who's like, I want to play a farming sim, but I really want hardcore first-person shooting, but I also want to do crafting of all my tools and parts. And I also want to make this into a battle royale or a extraction shooter. You may stumble upon something really fantastic, but you also have to figure out how these parts work. And building a hardcore example of all those genres I just mentioned, there may be someone out there who really loves that. But I can guarantee you that game will fail in the mainstream. Because once you start taking hardcore examples of different genres and putting it together, you are now focusing even more on a niche than before. And it's why when we see games that succeed in genre combinations and doing originality like this, they will still take like maybe beginner to moderate levels of complexity of those genres. Because again, just because you really enjoyed Escape from Tarkov meets XCOM meets Star Citizen, that doesn't mean everyone else likes those extreme examples. And to go again back to something like Dyson Sphere and Shapes.io, those games succeeded not only by doing something differently in the logistics automation genre, but they also made things more approachable. And that is a huge point when we talk about the evergreen or the viability of genres in terms of how much there is to them. But that will have to be for another point. So for those of you watching this, do you think there is the entirely 100% original game? Does that still exist today? And if you found it, let me know in the comments down below. But thanks for watching, and see everyone in the next video. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.